Deep inside a high-security invigilation room at the UK's National Archives in London, the staff keep a specific book in a locked repository. It's a battered, red-bound volume from 1939, carrying a warning on its cover, to be kept under lock and key. While it's no longer top secret, it is so popular that librarians won't let it leave their sight. The people traveling thousands of miles to read it aren't just historians. They're top-level policymakers and military planners. They are studying these 60 pages because they contain a detailed set of procedures for a very modern problem: how to wage an economic war. Today, global trade routes and raw materials are weaponized in real time. In the Strait of Hormuz, blockades are now a central feature of conflict. But Western governments are currently disorganized for this type of struggle. Their response strategies are fragmented across dozens of competing agencies. In the United States, responsibility for economic statecraft is split across 13 separate government departments. Those 13 departments contain over 1,400 individual offices. With so many players jockeying for influence, it is common for one agency to issue a directive that contradicts another. Without a unified economic pentagon to coordinate these efforts, the U.S. is reacting to crises in pieces. That lack of structure is exactly why leaders are turning to the 1939 Guide for a model of how to centralize power. The handbook does not focus on military strikes. Instead, it offers a granular guide to building a centralized clerical workforce that can manage a nation's trade as if it were a weapon. It divides the effort into 3 sections: theory, weapons, and procedure. The procedure section includes everything from the specific legislative language needed to declare a blockade to flowcharts for departmental communication. It maps out the exact human resources required to run the office, noting that precisely 50 typists were needed just to handle the administrative load of the ministry. It also provides protocols for drawing up a contraband list, the inventory of goods an enemy is forbidden to import, with advice on how to do so without alienating neutral allies. The handbook's premise is that effective economic warfare requires the government's civilian workforce to function with the same logistical discipline as a military division. In 2022, the United States launched an unprecedented sanctions regime against Russia, testing these bureaucratic principles on a global scale. The strategy was largely architected by Dalip Singh, then the Deputy National Security Advisor for International Economics. Before the invasion, Singh physically traveled to the archives at Kew to study the 1939 handbook, taking pages of notes on how the British government once coordinated its departments. He was particularly interested in the handbook's section on persuading or inducing neutral countries to sever trade with an enemy, a delicate process of balancing economic pressure with diplomatic restraint. Singh's use of the text demonstrates that a 90-year-old framework for managing supply chains can still serve as the basis for modern financial warfare. However, historians note that despite its meticulous organization, the Ministry of Economic Warfare did not ultimately defeat Nazi Germany. The handbook had a significant blind spot. It overestimated how much economic strain a regime can endure. It failed to account for how a powerful ideology can keep a population fighting even as their economy collapses. When economic pressure failed to break the enemy's will, the Allies eventually abandoned the handbook's red lines regarding civilian casualties and turned to massive bombing campaigns to achieve what sanctions could not. A perfectly coordinated bureaucratic system is only effective if it correctly calculates the psychological resilience of the target. Today, lawmakers in both the US and UK are working on legislation to consolidate economic power into a single centralized office. Trade officials say the 1939 handbook remains one of the only official examples of a structure that can manage these competing departments effectively. An organized economic strategy is a necessary tool in the modern world, but the lessons of 1939 suggest it is never a substitute for a broader military and diplomatic plan.